Guys, hello. I feel like I'm very close. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time, I want to keep everything. First of all, I want to go through loads of topics that come up on a daily basis for me, from clients, in person, online, followers, just in general around women's health, and I want to house all of the information in one place. So I thought, why not start posting them on YouTube and actually be able to kind of go into a bit more depth on these kind of topics. So the first one that I want to talk about, requested by you, is cortisol. So this hormone is often very misunderstood, and going by you guys, it is popping up all over your social media as well. So I thought it was the perfect place to start. So it's known as the stress hormone, okay? But there's actually so many other hormones related to the stress response system in our bodies, but because we can kind of like put a number or like test cortisol, we kind of only relate cortisol as our only stress hormone. However, there's loads more going on in our body when it comes to how we react to stress. So it's important that we're aware of that, and it's not just this one and only stress hormone called cortisol that does everything. So it actually plays a pretty vital role in our health, and I think it has a pretty negative tone from what we read about it or see online related to cortisol. And sometimes you maybe wouldn't understand that it's actually beneficial for us in so many ways. So it's produced by the adrenal glands. Basically in our brain there's a thing that will go off that will be like, we need to produce cortisol because we need to respond to a threat, regulate our blood sugar, manage inflammation, and basically keep our bodies balanced during stressful times. So you can see there that we actually need it to help us do all of those things. So manage our blood sugar, manage inflammation, all those things that maybe you wouldn't connect it with, but that is what it's important to be. That's why we need it, that's why it's important. So it's kind of like this life-saving hormone that kicks off the fight or flight whenever we're in danger. Now, how we perceive danger is very different to what maybe there actually is going on. So it could be that you're gonna get attacked by a dog, or it could be that your phone pinged and you got an email and it's almost tipped you over the edge. You know, like everyone's stress responses and stress bucket is going to be very different. So this is why it becomes very important that we take into account everyone's individual lifestyle and life factors. So the issue with cortisol is whenever it stays high for too long, and that's what we would call chronic stress, or like chronic cortisol levels. So you will have heard of acute and chronic before. For ages I always got confused with the two of them. Basically chronic is like ongoing, it's long term. So if you're in a heightened state of cortisol chronically, that's not good. Now, what would make us actually be in a heightened state of cortisol? So like, why would our cortisol stay high for a long period? And this comes down to lifestyle factors. So think of things like emotional stress, unhealthy diets, poor sleep, overtraining. So these are like 4 key things that we could be doing on a daily basis without realizing it, and that is causing our cortisol to stay so high. So it's not that you need to do this, like you need a quick fix to fix your cortisol. It's that you need to focus on the things that are making your cortisol stay elevated. So if you are a really bad sleeper, then you need to try and fix that first. So are you doing everything in your power that you can be to try to improve your sleep? That's the first place to start. If you're having a really poor diet and you're not really getting any healthy veg, any fruit, any of these anti-inflammatory foods, you're not focusing on your protein, you're not focusing on fiber, if you're not getting any fruit and vegetables. Basically, if you have quite a processed diet, that's the first place to start, is to start scaling that back and having more whole foods and more color into your diet. If you have a lot of emotional stress, you might want to start there, because there could be so many different reasons for this. You could be just feeling super overwhelmed with work. You could have a million things on. You could have kids. You could have a husband that maybe is not helpful. You could have family stress. There are so many things, and this is probably one of the hardest things for people to understand or to start fixing, because that is probably one of the ones that causes the most stress, therefore cortisol. So these things you want to try and like figure out the root cause and then work on that. And then in turn, your cortisol levels will reduce. They should reduce. Overtraining as well. So for example, you might have heard that, okay, you shouldn't do XYZ training because it heightens your cortisol. Cortisol is important in so many different ways. Our cortisol is high in the morning to help us wake up. normal. Or cortisol is high when we exercise at a high intensity, normal. That's a stress on the body. We need a stress on the body for our bodies to recover, to adapt, to then progress. So if we want to progress in our training, we need to produce cortisol. But it's how you are dealing with your recovery and how your training looks across the week. If you're doing high intensity sessions every single day, you're not getting a chance to recover, and you're just constantly like pushing yourself to that limit that your cortisol is staying high. That's what's going to happen. So you need to try and nip that in the bud and think, okay, let me scale back my training a little bit. Let me like replace 2 of my high intensity sessions with maybe a swim or yoga or something that's a bit more lower intensity that will allow your body to kind of regulate and your stress levels to come down a little bit. It'll allow your body to recover, and then your cortisol will regulate. If you don't fix any of those things, and you do know that whether it's emotional stress or training or diet or sleep, if you are dealing with any or all of those things and you're like, okay, that could probably be me, and you don't deal with those, the downside is that you might end up dealing with increase in belly fat, especially if you're a woman over the age of 40, because naturally we will get an increase in visceral fat then, and it's generally around our abdomen. So an increase in belly fat, potentially insulin resistance, so that's going to affect how we metabolize carbohydrates, so it's going to affect what you eat and how you basically break down food. High blood pressure, we definitely don't want high blood pressure, because then you're at the risk of other diseases. And then just a disruption in your mood, in your sleep, and in your immune system as well. So like I said, cortisol is not the bad guy. We do need it. It helps us in so many ways. But if we don't balance out the things that can cause our cortisol to stay high over a long period, then yes, it can be related to these negative effects then on our body. So we actually need cortisol, especially if we're women going into our 40s and 50s, perimenopausal, menopause, because it does help us with maintaining our muscle. It helps us with our bone density or metabolism in general. So as women, you would have heard of estrogen, and estrogen is really important because it helps buffer the body's response to stress and cortisol. However, if you're getting older, and we might notice kind of over the age of 40, as things start to change, maybe you're going into perimenopause, you might have fluctuations in your hormones. What happens there is that estrogen is kind of going up and down, and it's going to be on the way down. So if estrogen is starting to decline, that means that the body's response to stress and cortisol is changing, and it might be fluctuating. So it's not getting the same kind of, you don't have as much estrogen there to kind of balance things out and regulate the response to cortisol and stress. So that's something to pay attention to as well, especially if you're in that point, if you're at that point where you're kind of like, not sure if I'm perimenopausal, not sure what's going on. Pay attention to things like this and symptoms like this, because this will all start to make sense then, and you might start realizing that actually there's nothing wrong with you, this is all normal. And it could be a case that potentially a little bit of let's say transdermal estrogen as a hormone replacement therapy could be beneficial for you if this is something that you're super like struggling with. So being able to kind of vouch for yourself and understand your symptoms and understand that, oh my god, like my resilience in general or like my stress levels seem through the roof. If you're like, that's not me, and you're starting to notice these changes, it's important to take note of it, because this is all related, and once you're kind of aware of what's actually going on, then you'll be able to kind of vouch for yourself. So take note of these things that are happening. Another really interesting thing is that we have these 2 axes in the body. So one of them is controlling cortisol, and one controls the menstrual cycle. So there's like a direct relationship there. So this is why there can be a disruption to your menstrual cycle related to stress. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to. So in particular, if you are, let's say, so this is where people who are training quite a lot and they start to lose their cycle. If you're at the age where you just think, okay, well maybe I'm just losing my cycle anyway because I'm perimenopausal, but you're not paying attention to the fact that maybe you're overtraining, under-eating, your body's like in a heightened state of stress, or your levels of cortisol could be up here like chronically, then that could be the reason why your menstrual cycle is disrupted, not because you're perimenopausal. It could be the lifestyle factors, not just the perimenopause. Do you know what I mean? So it's really important that, again, you're starting to like relate all these things to each other and think, okay, actually, maybe I should start eating a little bit more and notice if anything changes with my menstrual cycle. If you're someone who's training a lot and not eating enough. So if you're in a kind of dieting phase and maybe pushing a bit too hard. So how do we manage it? It is all about balance and it's all about recovery. And I know these two things as women are really hard to get people to do, from experience of trying to coach women to slow down, maybe like take a minute for themselves, not be going at 100 miles an hour constantly, focusing on everyone else except themselves, but also trying to do a million things like diet, exercise, all of these things, and then not prioritizing their own recovery. This is where the damage can happen. So balance and recovery are key. So by incorporating things like breath work, like meditation, like yoga or stretching, just slowing down, having a bath, literally just taking a few deep breaths to yourself, these things really, really help. And I can tell you now, if you are just listening or watching to this now and maybe you haven't taken a deep breath all day, this is your chance. So I want you to genuinely stop now and take a deep breath in through your nose for 4 seconds. So deep breath in, hold, and exhale. If you noticed that your shoulders have gone from up here to down here and you haven't actually taken a deep breath all day, this is your reminder to do more of that. And it can be literally as simple as that. It can be a couple of breaths every now and then when you remember, just to try to get those kind of stress levels and push yourself out of this sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic, which is basically just into that kind of more relaxing part, and that's where we want to be, because that's where the magic happens. So like I said, exercise is vital. Exercise is even more important as we get older. So if you're not exercising, you should be, in particular strength training. However, if you're doing too much exercise or you feel like you're doing a lot every day, maybe a high intensity every day, that's when I would say maybe try to alternate it. So maybe do a high intensity day followed by a low intensity day, and try and factor it in like that, where you don't have to completely stop what you're doing, but you're slowing down a little bit. Sometimes taking a step back can lead you 2 steps forward. Couple that with a decent amount of rest, really focusing on your sleep and good nutrition will really, really fix most of your problems. But remember, cortisol and our stress response is good. Releasing stress is good because we need to put our bodies under stress so that we can progress. But our bodies need the chance to be put under stress, recover from that stress, and then we progress. So if you're just doing stress, at some point your body's just going to burn out. So in summary, cortisol is not the enemy. It is a vital hormone that, when managed well, it helps you perform, recover, and age healthily. Just understanding cortisol and what it does empowers us to make better lifestyle choices and treat our bodies with the respect they deserve. Hopefully you gain something from this and you maybe are kind of a little bit more calm by the end of this and understand what cortisol is needed for, but also understand why it can be too much of it isn't good. Like anything, too much of anything usually isn't a good thing. So understanding how you can manage it so that you can reduce it when it needs to be reduced by, more often than not, lifestyle factors is really, really important, and you do hold a lot of power. So hopefully you have a kind of a different take on cortisol now by watching this. If you found it useful, please feel free to send me a message, comment, forward it to a friend, and if you have any questions on anything, please do let me know.